The summit was 15 minutes away. Maybe less. I could see it, the snow-covered ridge cutting into a sky so clear it almost looked painted. We'd been climbing since before sunrise, nobody in the group talking anymore, just breathing and walking and counting down the last stretch in our heads. Then our guide stopped. He looked up at the clouds moving along the ridge, not at the trail, not at the peak, just the sky, for maybe 3 seconds. And then, without any drama in his voice at all, he said, "We're turning back." Nobody moved. I genuinely thought he was joking. We'd trained for months for this, flown across the country for this. The summit was right there, close enough that stopping felt almost cruel. Someone finally asked the question all of us were thinking, why would we quit when we're this close? He smiled, and it wasn't the smile of someone who was happy. It was the smile of someone who'd already made peace with something the rest of us hadn't. Then he said a sentence I've never been able to shake. "The mountain isn't going anywhere. You are." I was furious on the way down. It felt like failure. It felt like months of preparation collapsing into nothing over a few clouds nobody else could even read as dangerous. And underneath the anger was something I didn't want to admit out loud. I believed, the way most of us do, that quitting is what weak people do, and pushing through no matter what is what strong people do. We hear it from childhood. Never give up. Find a way. Keep climbing. It sounds inspiring right up until the moment you ask yourself a harder question. What if you're climbing the wrong mountain? Or worse, what if the problem was never the mountain at all, but your idea of what success on it was supposed to look like? That question followed me home, and eventually it led me somewhere I didn't expect, into a part of Japanese philosophy that almost nobody outside Japan talks about, one built entirely around the idea that knowing when to stop takes exactly as much skill as knowing when to keep going. Here's what actually bothered me for months after that trip. It wasn't that we failed to summit. Nothing had really been lost. The mountain was still there. My legs were stronger. I'd learned things about my own limits I hadn't known before. And yet all I could think about was the 15 minutes we didn't walk. Eventually I figured out what was actually going on, and it wasn't really about the mountain at all. It was that turning back felt like it erased the value of everything before it. Like the 12 hours of climbing only counted if they ended at the top. Once I noticed that feeling, I started seeing it everywhere else in my life, and in everyone else's. People stay in careers they quietly dread because they've already spent a decade building them. People stay in relationships that stopped working years ago because leaving would mean admitting those years were wasted. Founders keep funding businesses that clearly aren't working because they've already put too much in to walk away clean. Different situations, same sentence running underneath all of them, I've already come this far. As if the distance already covered somehow decides where you're obligated to go next. There's a real name for this pattern. Researchers Hal Arks and Catherine Bloomer documented it back in the 1980s and called it the sunk cost fallacy. The finding that the more we've already invested in something, the harder it becomes to abandon it, even once it's obviously not working, purely because stopping means admitting the earlier investment is gone either way. The decision stops being about what makes sense going forward. It becomes about protecting what's already been spent. And here's the part that actually stings a little. If you were hiking through a forest and realized after 2 hours that you'd taken the wrong trail, you wouldn't keep walking for another 3 just because you'd already put in the 2. You'd turn around immediately, and you wouldn't call yourself a failure for it. You'd call it correcting your direction. We do this instinctively with hiking trails. We almost never do it with careers, relationships, or dreams, because somewhere along the way we decided that continuing must always be the braver choice. Sometimes it is, but not always. And Japanese thinking, in mountaineering, in martial arts, in business, has spent a long time building out the difference. Before judo students ever learn how to win a match, they spend weeks on something else entirely. It's called Ukemi, the art of falling correctly. Not avoiding the fall. Surviving it. Think about how backwards that seems from the outside. You walk into a fighting discipline expecting to learn how to attack, and instead your first lessons are all about how to hit the ground without breaking anything. For a beginner it's almost insulting. When do we get to the real technique? But the instructor already knows something the student doesn't yet. If you don't know how to fall, you won't survive long enough in the sport to learn anything else. Ukemi isn't built to prevent failure. It's built so that when failure happens, and it will, you can get back up immediately instead of being taken out by an injury that never needed to happen in the first place. That's the whole philosophy in one sentence. Falling isn't the failure. Falling badly is the failure. And I think that's exactly what our guide understood that day on the mountain. He wasn't trying to protect us from disappointment. He was protecting us from the kind of fall you don't recover from, the one where the weather turns violent near the summit and there's no clean way back down. He knew we could try again another day. He couldn't guarantee we'd survive trying that particular day. That's the whole difference between quitting and what the Japanese call Tettai no Bigaku, roughly, the aesthetics of the strategic retreat. It shows up in Japanese business language too, where executives talk about Tettai no Yuki, the courage of withdrawal, when deciding to shut down a failing product line. It's taught in business schools there as an actual leadership skill, not something to apologize for. Compare that to how a lot of Western founders talk about closing a failed company, often as the saddest chapter of the story, something requiring a long apologetic farewell post, and you start to see how differently these two cultures have been trained to think about the exact same decision. So how do you actually tell the difference between a strategic retreat and just giving up out of fear? Because they can feel identical from the inside. Your chest tightens the same way either way. Your mind tells you to stop either way. Here's the test that's actually worked for me. Ask whether the reason you want to stop is coming from something that changed outside of you, or from ordinary discomfort happening inside of you. Our guide didn't turn us around because the climb got hard. It had been hard since 4 in the morning. He turned us around because the wind shifted, a specific, external, measurable condition that had nothing to do with how tired anyone's legs were. That's the actual signal worth trusting. Learning a new language gets uncomfortable around week 3, when the early excitement wears off and you're stuck fumbling through basic sentences. That discomfort is just the price of the skill, not evidence you should quit. But if you've taken a job that matched your values a year ago, and the company has since changed, your health has quietly gotten worse, and you've already tried talking to your manager with nothing improving, that's not discomfort anymore. That's evidence. And evidence deserves a completely different response than ordinary friction does. The version of quitting that actually is a failure looks nothing like the guide walking us down that mountain. It's quieter than that. It's usually not even a real decision, more like a slow fade where you stop trying but never formally close the door, so you end up stuck in a kind of limbo, not fully in and not fully out. No ritual, no honest reason, no clarity. That's the climber who neither turns back nor keeps going, just freezes on the mountain until the weather makes the decision for them. I went back to that same mountain a year later. Same trail. By pure coincidence, the same guide. Before we even started, he checked the sky one last time and said, "Today the mountain wants visitors." A year earlier I would have rolled my eyes at a line like that. This time I understood exactly what he meant. He wasn't talking about the mountain's mood. He was talking about timing, and how much of what we call failure is really just a decision made at the wrong moment, mistaken for a decision that was wrong altogether. We reached the summit that day. Same spot that had felt impossible to reach the year before. And on the way down, I finally asked him something I'd been sitting on for 12 months. "Did it bother you, turning us back last time?" He thought about it for a second, and then he said something I don't think I'll ever forget. "No mountain remembers the people who almost reached the top. But every family remembers the people who came home." Neither of us said anything else after that. There wasn't really anything left to say. That's the whole idea, as simply as I can put it. Real quitting closes a door permanently on something that still mattered, usually out of fear or exhaustion, without ever being honest with yourself about why. Strategic retreat closes one specific attempt, clearly and on purpose, so the actual goal underneath it stays alive long enough for you to come back to it with better timing or better information. So if there's a mountain in your life right now, a job, a relationship, a version of yourself you've been afraid to let go of, before you decide anything, ask the question underneath all of this. Am I protecting my future, or am I protecting my pride? Those two things can look identical for a long time. But only one of them is actually worth the climb. If this changed the way you think about something you've been holding on to, stay around, because next week I'm getting into a Japanese idea about timing and patience that completely reframes what it means to wait for the right moment instead of forcing one. And I'd genuinely like to know, what's the one thing you've been white-knuckling through right now, purely because you've already come this far? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them.